There are horror films, and then there are the ones that shouldn't have existed. The 1970s was a wild decade, a time when filmmakers pushed the limits of sanity, violence, and taste. Some called it art. Others called it dangerous. Censors just called it banned. But these movies didn't fade quietly into the dark. They survived, traded on grainy tapes, whispered about in midnight theaters, and rediscovered by the bravest horror fans today. So, dim the lights, steady your nerves, and step into the shadows with me. These are the 10 most brutal horror exploitation films of the 1970s. Movies so shocking, so raw, that entire countries tried to erase them. But film always finds a way. The Last House on the Left, 1972. It began as a low-budget project, filmed by a man who didn't yet know he'd redefine horror. Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left wasn't just another grindhouse flick. It was a gut punch to 1970s cinema. Picture this: no glossy sets, no Hollywood polish, just a shaky camera, humid air, and an atmosphere that crawled under your skin. What starts as a simple story, two teenage girls heading into the city for a concert, spirals into something truly nightmarish when they cross paths with a group of escaped convicts. But here's where it becomes unforgettable. After enduring their torment, fate delivers the killers straight to the home of one of the victims. What follows isn't justice, it's vengeance, raw and feral. A suburban couple becomes the monsters they despise. The film stares into the heart of violence and asks, what happens when innocence fights back and wins? When it premiered, audiences weren't ready. Some fainted, some fled theaters. In the UK, it was banned for nearly 3 decades, labeled as obscene under the infamous Video Nasties Act. In the US, theaters were raided, prints confiscated, and still, people lined up to see it. Word of mouth made it legendary. What made it so disturbing wasn't just what you saw, it was how real it felt. The handheld cinematography and improvised performances stripped away cinematic comfort. There was no score to soften the blows, no monsters to hide behind. The evil here was human, messy, ordinary, and far too believable. Even critics were torn. Roger Ebert, while appalled, couldn't deny its raw power. It wasn't exploitation for the sake of shock, it was a mirror reflecting America's own obsession with violence, vengeance, and moral decay. Half a century later, The Last House on the Left remains a divisive film. Some call it vile, others call it genius. But one thing's for sure, it marked the birth of a new kind of horror, one that traded shadows for the uncomfortable glare of reality. So remember the tagline: to avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie. Only it never really feels like one. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. It starts under a blinding Texas sun, heat shimmer on the road, the low hum of cicadas, and the kind of dread you can't quite name. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't just another horror movie. It was an experience that felt too real for comfort. Director Tobe Hooper, armed with a shoestring budget and unbreakable nerves, created something that would terrify the world without showing much at all. There's almost no blood. No supernatural monsters, just rusted metal, rotting wood, and the unbearable sound of a chainsaw echoing through the empty countryside. The story? Simple. A van full of friends takes a detour that leads them straight into a nightmare, an isolated farmhouse, a family that's different, and one hulking man wearing another person's face. Leatherface. He doesn't chase for fun. He works like a butcher, efficient and detached. It's not evil, it's routine. When the film hit theaters in 1974, people screamed, fainted, even ran out. Critics called it vile, insane, a descent into madness. Censors banned it in multiple countries, Britain, Australia, Germany, claiming it was too disturbing for civilized audiences. Yet, word of mouth turned it into a legend. It spread underground, traded like a forbidden relic. What made Chainsaw revolutionary was its authenticity. Hooper shot on 16mm film under real Texas heat with the stench of rotting meat filling the set. The exhaustion on the actors' faces? Real. The screaming? Real. The fear? Absolutely real. But behind all the grime and grit was something deeper, a portrait of America itself. A dying rural world clinging to survival. A family pushed past reason. A generation confronting decay. The horror wasn't supernatural, it was societal. Nearly 50 years later, it still crawls under your skin. Not because of what it shows, but because of what it suggests. The terror that maybe, just maybe, there's no reason for the madness. It simply is. Few films have been banned, feared, and admired in equal measure like this one. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't just redefine horror, it carved its name into cinema history with the sound of a screaming saw and the silence that followed. Cannibal Holocaust, 1979. What if I told you there's a film so convincing, so unrelenting, that its director was arrested because the world thought he'd actually filmed the real thing? That's the story of Cannibal Holocaust, the infamous 1979 shocker that blurred the line between cinema and nightmare. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, this Italian jungle horror follows a documentary crew that ventures into the Amazon and never returns. What's found later is their footage, raw, unedited, and disturbingly real. The film asks a haunting question. Who are the real savages, the tribe in the jungle, or the civilized people behind the camera? When it premiered, audiences had never seen anything like it. The shaky footage, the chaos, the sheer sense of authenticity, it was too believable. Italian authorities were convinced it was real. They arrested Deodato for creating what they thought was a genuine atrocity film. He had to bring his actors to court, alive and well, to prove it was all staged. But here's what most people don't know. Cannibal Holocaust wasn't made just to shock. It was made as commentary. Deodato wanted to expose the sensationalism of the media and how far people will go for a story. The found footage style, decades before the Blair Witch Project or Paranormal Activity, was groundbreaking. It felt immediate, raw, terrifyingly close. Of course, censors across the world didn't see the philosophy, they saw the horror. The film was banned in over 50 countries for its violence, its realism, and its relentless depiction of humanity's darker instincts. Even today, it's often whispered about, screened in underground circles, analyzed by critics, and feared by casual viewers. But here's the truth. Beneath the controversy, Cannibal Holocaust stands as one of the most daring experiments in film history. It forced audiences to confront their own voyeurism. It showed us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't in the jungle, they're behind the lens. Half art film, half fever dream, all legend, Cannibal Holocaust remains the most infamous film ever to ask, when we watch horror, what does that say about us? I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Imagine a film so raw, so merciless, that even its critics couldn't agree if it was art or an act of madness. That was I Spit on Your Grave, released in 1978, directed by Mir Zarchi, and instantly branded one of the most shocking motion pictures ever made. The story follows Jennifer Hills, a young writer who retreats to a quiet cabin in the woods, searching for inspiration. What she finds instead is a brutal ordeal that would forever change her, and the entire landscape of horror cinema. What begins as a story of cruelty transforms into one of vengeance, control, and eerie empowerment. Shot on a shoestring budget and filmed with haunting realism, the movie felt less like a piece of fiction and more like something you weren't supposed to see. Its silence was louder than its screams. Its pacing was deliberate, forcing viewers to sit in the unease. There were no shadows to hide behind, no soundtrack to soften the blow, just a woman reclaiming her strength in the most unsettling way imaginable. When it premiered, audiences were divided. Some walked out in protest, others called it revolutionary. Censors in multiple countries banned it outright, labeling it too dangerous, too realistic, and too disturbing for public viewing. Even major critics called it garbage, while others quietly admitted it exposed a primal truth about power and revenge that Hollywood rarely dared to touch. What makes I Spit on Your Grave unforgettable isn't just its shock factor, it's the paradox beneath it. It's a revenge story that forces viewers to look away, yet somehow makes them question why. It's not about glorifying violence, it's about stripping it of glamour completely. Over the years, the film has been re-examined, reinterpreted, and even remade, but the 1978 original still feels like a dare, a raw, unfiltered look at justice from the edge of madness. Whether you hate it, fear it, or respect it, one thing's for certain. Once you've seen I Spit on Your Grave, you never really forget it. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. Out in the desert, where the sun burns white and the silence hums like static, there are no heroes. Just survivors. The Hills Have Eyes wasn't your average horror flick. It was a grim reflection of civilization, stripped bare under the unforgiving Nevada sun. Directed by Wes Craven, the man who'd later give nightmares a name with A Nightmare on Elm Street, this 1977 shocker was his response to the darker side of human nature. After his debut, The Last House on the Left, Craven wanted to explore something more primal. What happens when a wholesome American family crosses paths with another family, one that's not so civilized? The setup is deceptively simple. The Carter family, mom, dad, kids, and even their dogs, are traveling across the desert when their car breaks down near a closed military testing site. But they're not alone. Watching from the cliffs are a clan of cannibalistic survivors, mutated by years of isolation and desperation, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Craven shot the movie on a minuscule budget, out in the blazing desert, with cast and crew enduring real heat, dust, and exhaustion. The result? A movie that feels authentic, sweaty, and terrifyingly real. There's no glossy Hollywood sheen here, just grit, grime, and survival instinct. When The Hills Have Eyes hit theaters, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Critics called it too violent, too bleak. Several countries banned it outright, labeling it inhuman. Yet it wasn't the gore that disturbed people. It was the mirror it held up. Craven wasn't just showing monsters in the hills. He was suggesting they might not be so different from us. The film's power came from its symmetry. Two families, both willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Civilization versus savagery. Love versus hunger. And somewhere in the middle, humanity loses its balance. Over 4 decades later, The Hills Have Eyes remains a desert fever dream. Dusty, brutal, unforgettable. A reminder that sometimes the wild isn't out there in the hills. It's hidden deep within us. Snuff, 1976. Now this one wasn't just controversial, it was notorious. Snuff wasn't banned for what it showed, but for what people believed it showed. It blurred the line between fiction and fear, between a grindhouse gimmick and genuine horror. And that's what made it one of the most dangerous films of the 1970s. Not because of the blood, but because of the illusion. Directed and later re-edited by Michael and Roberta Findlay, Snuff began its life as a low-budget exploitation film called The Slaughter. But years later, enterprising producers decided to give it a new ending, one that would ignite an urban legend that refuses to die. In that ending, the movie suddenly cuts from the story to what appears to be a behind-the-scenes segment. The camera shakes, the actors argue, and then chaos. What follows looks like a real, unplanned act of violence caught on film. Audiences gasped, some believed it, others ran out of the theater, and the rumor spread like wildfire. A real crime had been filmed for the movie. It wasn't true, of course, but that didn't stop the panic. Newspaper headlines screamed, police departments investigated, theaters were protested. For a while, Snuff was the movie you weren't supposed to see. Did you know? The film's tagline, the film that could only be made in South America, where life is cheap, was deliberately designed to shock. It worked. People queued around the block, half out of curiosity, half out of morbid fascination. But beneath all the outrage, Snuff became something more than a film. It became a cultural ghost story. It raised an uncomfortable question. If a movie looks too real, where do we draw the line between entertainment and exploitation? Even now, decades later, Snuff stands as a strange, unsettling milestone. Not because of what's on screen, but because of what it made people believe. Sometimes the scariest part of cinema isn't what's filmed. It's what we think we're seeing. House on the Edge of the Park, 1979. Some movies shock you once, others stay with you like a bruise that never fades. House on the Edge of the Park is one of those films. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, yes, the same filmmaker who gave the world Cannibal Holocaust, this 1979 exploitation thriller was banned in several countries before it ever had a chance to explain itself. The setup feels deceptively simple. Two thugs, played by David Hess and Giovanni Lombardo Radice, crash an upscale party on the outskirts of New York. The guests are polished, wealthy, and smug, the kind of people who think their status protects them. But they've just invited in something wild, something unhinged. What follows is a night of twisted games, class conflict, and raw psychological tension. David Hess, who had already terrified audiences in The Last House on the Left, gives a performance that's both magnetic and terrifying. He's the embodiment of chaos, charming one moment, cruel the next. Every scene feels like it could snap without warning. Did you know? The film was shot in just 3 weeks, with much of its intensity coming from the actors' improvisation. That spontaneous energy, the unpredictability, is part of what made censors so uneasy. They couldn't quite tell where the acting stopped and the danger began. When House on the Edge of the Park was finally released, it didn't just push buttons, it ripped them out of the wall. Critics called it depraved. Audiences called it unforgettable. And in true exploitation fashion, the controversy only made it stronger. But here's the secret most people miss. Beneath all its grit, the film is a dark mirror about power, who holds it, who abuses it, and how quickly it can flip. It's not just about horror in a house. It's about what happens when the masks of civility crack and the monsters inside people finally show their faces. So, is House on the Edge of the Park a horror film, or a reflection of human cruelty dressed as one? Either way, it's a movie that dares you to keep watching, long after you probably should have looked away. Thriller, 1973. Some films whisper their fury. Thriller, a cruel picture, screams it through clenched teeth. Released in 1973, this Swedish revenge tale from director Bo Arne Vebenius didn't just bend the rules of cinema, it smashed them to pieces. At its core is a woman named Madeline, played with haunting restraint by Christina Lindberg. After suffering through cruelty that leaves her mute, she trains herself into a silent assassin, a living embodiment of vengeance. By day, she hides behind dark glasses and a face of porcelain calm. By night, she moves through the world like a storm given form. What made Thriller so infamous wasn't just its violence, but its precision. Every frame feels deliberate, almost poetic in its brutality. The film's pacing, slow, methodical, hypnotic, pulls you into Madeline's transformation with a kind of grim elegance. When the vengeance comes, it's not chaos. It's choreography. Did you know? Quentin Tarantino has cited Thriller as a key inspiration for Kill Bill, from the iconic eye patch to the cold, methodical revenge arc. But long before that, Lindbergh's character was already a myth whispered among grindhouse fans and film scholars alike. Censors hated it. They called it too extreme, too cold, too real. Some countries banned it outright. Yet, even trimmed and censored, Thriller became a legend, not just a film, but a statement. It dared to show what happens when someone broken by the world decides to fight back on her own terms. The cinematography is almost unnervingly beautiful. Long, slow-motion shots that feel like a dream you shouldn't be having. And the soundtrack? It hums like an echo from somewhere between sorrow and fury. Thriller, a cruel picture, isn't just an exploitation film. It's a revenge opera, a frozen scream set to film grain. It asks one chilling question. When the world takes everything from you, what kind of person do you become when you take it back? The Night Porter, 1974. Some films don't just tell a story, they haunt you long after the screen fades to black. The Night Porter, 1974, directed by Liliana Cavani, is one of those rare, unsettling masterpieces that refuses to be neatly categorized. It's not quite romance, not quite horror. It's obsession painted in shadows. The film stars Dirk Bogarde as Max, a former officer living quietly as a night porter in post-war Vienna. When he encounters Lucia, played by Charlotte Rampling, a woman from his past, the air itself seems to freeze. Their reunion isn't tender. It's electric, dangerous, almost ritualistic. The two share a past drenched in pain and control, and their encounter reawakens something darkly magnetic between them. What made The Night Porter so controversial wasn't just its subject matter, it was its tone. Cavani doesn't give us heroes or villains. She gives us human beings trapped in memory, guilt, and desire, circling each other like ghosts of a past they can't escape. Every frame feels like a confession no one wants to hear. Censors in multiple countries banned the film, calling it indecent and disturbing. But beneath the surface shock lies something more profound. A study of trauma and obsession that forces viewers to confront the uncomfortable side of human emotion. It's a story about the chains we forge for ourselves, long after the war is over. Did you know? When the film premiered, it divided critics right down the middle. Some hailed it as brave and psychologically raw. Others wanted it erased from cinema history. But decades later, it's recognized as a cornerstone of European art cinema. A film that challenged how stories about survival, power, and memory could be told. The Night Porter isn't an easy watch. It's elegant, haunting, and claustrophobic, like walking through a memory you wish you could forget. And yet, you can't look away. Because deep down, it asks the question that defines every haunting love story. If your past comes knocking, would you open the door? Bloodsucking Freaks, 1976. Now here's a film that didn't just cross the line. It gleefully erased it with a wicked grin. Bloodsucking Freaks, 1976, directed by Joel M. Reed, is the kind of underground horror movie whispered about in cult circles. A notorious entry in the grindhouse era that both horrified and fascinated audiences in equal measure. The film takes place in the dark heart of New York's offbeat theater scene, where a twisted showman named Sardu stages grand guignol performances for thrill seekers. But behind the curtain, things get darker, much darker. What unfolds is part stage act, part nightmare, drenched in morbid satire. Reed's movie wasn't just trying to shock. It was mocking the appetite for shock itself. It held up a cracked mirror to the exploitation genre and said, "You want horror? You want excess? Here's the reflection you've been asking for." Every exaggerated act, every over-the-top moment was designed to make you question where entertainment ends and exploitation begins. When the film premiered, censors couldn't decide if it was art, provocation, or just pure chaos. Many theaters banned it outright. Critics called it sick, tasteless, and unwatchable. But here's the thing. Blood-Sucking Freaks was never aiming for polite applause. It was a carnival of bad taste, a grotesque stage play meant to make you squirm, laugh, and maybe even question why you're still watching. Did you know? The film was originally released under the title The Incredible Torture Show, but even the distributors realized that might be a bit much for the mainstream crowd. Its later rebranding didn't help much. If anything, it made the movie even more notorious. And yet, despite all the bans, protests, and moral outrage, Blood-Sucking Freaks found its audience. The midnight movie diehards, the VHS scavengers, the fans who lived for the bizarre. It's not for everyone, and maybe that's the point. Because sometimes the most disturbing films aren't about monsters or ghosts. They're about us, and the things we're willing to watch for a thrill. And there you have it. 10 savage nightmares from the 1970s that defied censors, disgusted critics, and still haunt cinema's bloodiest backrooms. These weren't just movies. They were cinematic rebellions, each one screaming that art should never be safe. So, which of these banned horror films would you dare to watch in the dark? Hit that like button, drop your choice in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's wildest, weirdest hidden corners. Until next time, keep your projector running and your nerves steady.